Hey, it's good to see you all. Thank you for coming out to hear me talk a little bit. This is an exciting thing to know that this is happening in Houston, and I gather in a number of other cities and multiple places here as well. Thank you for taking the time to come hear me talk today. I was telling Cliff sitting there that I could talk to you about the finishing fund, the Great Commission. Just wind me up and I'll go. Telling my own story is a little bit more awkward, but I really hope that in telling that today, what you will get is a sense from me. Can you all hear me? I've got the lavalier on. Okay. A sense from me that my story is the story of God's work in my life. I want to be sure to communicate that today. Now, Jim said what I was going to start with, which is perfect. Thank you, Jim, for setting me up. But I think I have the best job in the world. Now, if somebody you'd never met before from Louisville, Kentucky showed up and said, that he had the best job in the world, you might have a couple of questions about that, some things that you'd want to know. What would you want to know from a guy who said he had the best job in the world? What questions would you have? Why would I say that? It's rewarding. What's the comp plan look like? So has significance, eternal significance, get to work with fantastic people, and uses the talents, the gifts, and the experience that God has given me in a way that I never imagined that I would use them. I can tell you that even 10 years ago, I would have never imagined that I would have the opportunity to do what I get to do every day, which is to be the leader of a partnership of folks in this thing we call the finishing fund. And I'm going to come back and talk about that more later. What I'd like to do now just for a minute is to tell you a little bit about how I got to this place and spend a little time just telling that story. So it starts with my family. There they all are, my two sons and my daughter, their wives and kids. And the real important first step is this pretty lady here, my wife Gena. We've been married 43 years. I met Gena on a blind date in November of 1979. How we even managed to connect with each other is a story I don't have time to tell you, but even God's hand at work in that. I was at the time a pagan. I lived in New York City. I was having a good time. 23 and single in New York is great. And then I met this girl, and the night after our first date, I called my parents at 1 o'clock in the morning, and I said, I've met the girl I'm going to marry. My dad said, do you know what time it is? And hung up. There was only one problem with that plan, which is that I knew I wanted to marry her, but she needed a little bit of persuading. And I went to work on that, but there was one really big problem, and that is that she was following Jesus, and I wasn't. And so after a couple of months, I got this Christian Dear John letter. She would hate it that I described it that way to y'all. You know what a Christian Dear John letter is? It says, you're a really nice guy, and I've really enjoyed getting to know you, but I'm a Christian and you're not, so there's no future in this. And I'm like, whoa, whoa, whoa. And so we began to talk about that a little bit, and what I'm going to do today is tell you my story. I'm going to use 4 books to do that, and the first one is this book right here, Mere Christianity. She gave me a copy of this book. I read it on the airplane trip home from visiting her. I thought I was a really smart guy, right? And then I encountered C.S. Lewis. And I figure, if this guy can believe in Jesus, I can believe in Jesus. C.S. Lewis really was the first person that I'd ever heard that laid out the argument for me that there's really only 3 choices we have with Jesus. He's either crazy, as anybody would be who says they're God and is not, or he's a liar. He knows he's not God and he's just lying to us. His character won't admit that. But if he's not a lunatic and he's not a liar, then the only other option is that he is the Lord. And I thought about that for a little while, and I said, I can't think any way out of that trap. And so as a result of receiving that book, I gave my life to Jesus Christ and began this journey. I would have never imagined that I would do that. It didn't occur to me before I met Gena that that was on my plate, but it's a huge inflection point in my story. The second book I want to tell you about is this book right here, Using Lotus 1, 2, 3. Now, some of you may have used this book to learn Lotus 1, 2, 3 back in the day. Some of you are asking, what is Lotus 1, 2, 3? But back before you were born, when PCs were first getting started, this was Excel. This was the first spreadsheet. Through a series of very improbable events, I was working for a small company in Indianapolis, the Q Corporation, and wrote this book. I had actually met the founders of Lotus Development Corporation in Boston when I lived there. Their offices were on the second floor of the building where I was on the first floor, and they had asked me if I might beta test their software. So I had copies of the software before anybody knew that it was coming. I helped them with the manual. I actually still have at home the Xerox copy of the original manual that they gave me to work through. And so in late 1981, a fellow named Jeff LeBlond and I wrote this book called Using 1, 2, 3. Now, I was in a time when a good book in this genre might sell 5,000 or 10,000 copies. We sold more than 25,000 copies in the first month, and it just kept going after that. I have no idea how many copies the book ultimately sold. It was well over 1 million copies. So a lot of people, I helped a lot of people learn to use Lotus 1, 2, 3 back in the day. But when I discovered what was going on in this space, I realized this is a business I want to be in. So I quit that job and I moved back to Louisville, and I started a company called the Cobb Group that published other books and newsletters about computer software. Some of you may have subscribed to our newsletters. We, were given tips and techniques about how those things could be used more effectively. Every month we'd send you 16 pages of interesting content, and that business was started in 1984, and in 1991, we sold it to the Ziff Davis company, the Ziff family out of New York, big computer magazine publishers. And that was a dream realized, right? Every entrepreneur, you start a company, you want to see it grow and succeed, and nothing better than having somebody tell you they'll write you a nice check for your company. And so we did that in 1991. And really everything else that's happened in my business career has kind of followed on that in one way or another. After having sold the company, I stayed there a couple of years. In 1994, I went to a childhood friend of mine in Louisville and said, we ought to do some startup investing together. I said, if 1 was fun, 10 has to be a blast, right? I didn't realize that the problems also scaled, with that. So we started this company, Chrysalis Ventures, that was a little boutique venture capital firm in Louisville, and ended up investing in about 10 companies. I ended up being on the board of a couple of them. Golden State Overnight out in California, an intrastate transportation company. We ended up selling that about 10 years later, did well with it. This company, Apris, is still going. It's one of Louisville's most successful entrepreneurial stories. I actually was the first investor in that, and then got invited in to be the CEO and ran that company for 10 years. After I left, they did several more rounds of private equity investing, and actually now have sold 2/3 of the company for valuations well over $1 billion. So that company has been enormously successful. I was there at the very beginning. It wasn't worth $1 billion at the beginning. In fact, when I showed up for work the first day as the seasoned CEO at that time, I called my wife and I said, this thing is so broken, I don't think I can fix it. Thankfully, we were able to do that. I also had the privilege over the years of serving on the boards of some other great companies, a company in Louisville, Summit Energy. It's now part of Schneider Electric. It's an energy consulting company, and Genscape, My Health Direct in Nashville. Really my career was in this space of startups and venture capital and private equity. And anybody who's been in that space knows that you don't, you strike out sometimes. Not everything works. But enough of these things worked for me that it ended up being a very successful career, and God has been financially very good to us. Which brings me to the third book that I want to tell you about. this book called Money, Possessions, and Eternity. How many of you have seen this book? Randy Alcorn. There's a shorter version of it called The Treasure Principle. It's much more accessible. That one's kind of big and thick. The Treasure Principle is easier. God brought this book into Gena's and my life in 1991 when we were in the process of selling that first company, the Cobb Group. And I learned some things in this book that have transformed my life. One thing Randy teaches is the idea that, giving to God's kingdom is not sacrifice, it's investment. That we each have the opportunity to lay up for ourselves, by the way, those are Jesus' words, lay up for yourself treasure in heaven. We can't know exactly what form that's going to take. The currency in the kingdom will be very different from what we value here on earth. But the promise is that what we give to God's kingdom, we don't give away, we send ahead for our eternity. Randy also introduced me to the quote by a famous missionary, Jim Elliot. You may have heard this quote. He is no fool who gives up what he cannot keep to gain that which he cannot lose. The fact of the matter is that we're all mortal. One of these days, all of our stuff is not going to make any difference to us at all. The only thing that's going to matter is what we've invested in God's kingdom that will be waiting for us when we get to the other side. And my wife and I both read this book. And as I said, it happened at a critical time. We were getting ready to sell our first company. And that led us to a decision that we would adopt a policy in our lives of kind of radical generosity. I don't talk about the numbers on that because that's a little bit private, but I think it would be, one way to say it would be, we have given away so far a lot more than we've kept. And that has been awesome, right? Because of that, we have been privileged to help support all kinds of fantastic ministries, and very often have been privileged to be involved in the foundation of some of these. Like Eighth Day Cafe, we gave the money to establish this coffee house for a coffee shop for women in the sex traffic in Calcutta, India, to Americans who had gone, and we helped provide the seed capital for that. This ministry, Practical Shepherding, helps pastors deal with the practical realities of what it means to be a pastor. In seminary, they teach a lot of great theology, but they don't teach you what to say when you're in jail with a woman whose son has just been arrested and you're sitting there with her in the courthouse. That's the kind of thing that Brian and his ministry, Practically Shepherding, helped to do. We helped our friend Paul Miller start his ministry, See Jesus. Some of you may have read the book, A Praying Life, comes out of that ministry. So, not only have we been able to invest in God's kingdom, but we have formed relationships with people through that giving that we consider among our most precious friendships, people who are like-minded and kingdom-oriented. It's been amazing. One of those particularly I want to tell you about is my friend Paul Eshelman. Paul was for many years, the leader of the Jesus Film Project. Y'all heard of the Jesus Film, right? The Jesus Film is a movie of the Gospel of Luke. It is the most viewed and most translated movie in the history of the world. It is now in over 2,000 languages, which I think takes it down to the languages with population of about 25,000. There's 5,000 more, by the way, so we've gone a long way, but there's still a long way to go. It's been seen by billions of people around the world. It is probably the most powerful evangelistic tool that God has ever produced. I met Paul in 1991, a key year, in 1994, when we had sold my business and I was getting ready to leave, and some friends invited us over to meet him. The first thing he did, I thought this was special to me. I found out later Paul did this to every single person he met. He said, well, I want you to come to California and work for me. We were building a house. I didn't want to move to California. So I said, Paul, no, I'm not going to do that. And he said, well, in that case, I'm going to Nigeria in a couple of weeks. Would you come with me and see what we're doing? Now, I live in Louisville. You all might not think that's the South, but I have Southern, you don't say no twice, right? So I said yes. And I'm literally driving home from that friend's house. I'm saying, Gena, I don't want to go to Nigeria. What's the cliche? Every Christian, God, I'll do anything you want. Just don't make me go to Africa, right? And so Gena says to me, well, you could tell him no, but he would think you're a coward. And and I would have been. I went with Paul on that trip. We spent 10 days traveling in Nigeria and Ghana and a little country called Sierra Leone. It's really, really a very sad place. And that trip was eye-opening to me. I got to see that the gospel is a universal gospel. It's global in scope, that people love Jesus everywhere in the world. I got to see what happens with the work of people that are taking the gospel and sharing it with people who've never heard it before. I got to visit places that I'd never been. And, like once you've been there, it's like, okay, I can do that. I can do that again. I may be the only person who is both an elder in an evangelical church and a member of a emirate council of a Muslim emirate in Nigeria. I don't know that there's a whole big, the Venn diagram on that I think is pretty small. That's me and my son and my friend Daniel Atiaye, and that man is the Emir of Bauchi in Bauchi State in Nigeria, one of the traditional rulers in Nigeria. This was a time when we were making mission trips in northern Nigeria, visiting and opening doors for our friend Daniel Atiaye, who I met when I went to Nigeria for the first time. This is me and Paul with his back to you there in India, where we are baptizing new converts of a ministry that we were supporting called New Life Christian Church. And I'm way deep in this now, right? I'm in Nigeria, I'm in India. What in the world is going on here in my life? It was through Paul that I caught this vision of this verse, one of my favorite verses in Scripture. This gospel of the kingdom will be preached in the whole world as a testimony to all nations, and then the end will come. So I'd like to show you 2 or 3 things about this verse that has really been transformational in my life. One thing is, what does Jesus say? This gospel may be preached, might be preached. What does he say? It will be preached. I want to tell you, if you don't take anything else away from today, take this away. The promises of God are the most real thing you know. There is more chance of the chair you're sitting on right now dissolving into thin air and dropping you on the floor than there is of even one of God's promises not coming true. His promises are rooted in his glory and his goodness, we're told in Scripture. Glory means he's so powerful that nothing or no one can thwart him from doing what he wants to do. If he says he's going to do something, he can't be stopped. And he's so good that he would never make a promise and then renege on it. He will keep his word. This will be accomplished. What will be accomplished? Well, the gospel, the good news of Jesus Christ, that we're saved by grace through faith in his finished work, will be preached in the whole world and to every nation. That word nation trips us up a little bit in the English because it's a translation of a Greek word, ethnos. And an ethnos is not a nation state. An ethnos is not France or Germany or Italy or China. An ethnos is a group of people who share a common heritage, culture, ancestry, language, geography, a people group. And the really smart people who study these things tell us that there are somewhere between 12 and 13,000 ethnos on the surface of the earth. And Jesus' commitment is to us that there will be disciples of Jesus in every one of those 12 to 13,000 ethnos on the planet. That's the mission that he has given us to do in the Great Commission. They're scattered all over the place. There's a lot of them in India. There's a lot of them in Nigeria, where I've been many times. Plenty in China. The ones that are left after 2,000 years tend to be way up in the mountains or out in the jungle or out in the middle of a desert somewhere. They're not easy to get to. Some of them don't like visitors very much. They shoot bows and arrows at them or guns. And so there's reasons that the ones that are left, but this is the promise that Jesus gave us and the work that he gave us to do. And then one more thing I want to show you about this verse. What happens when the promise is fulfilled? What does he say will happen? And then the end will come. He's promised us that when we finish this, that will be the terminating event in human history. God has determined that his kingdom is going to include people from every one of these ethnos that he has made, that his kingdom will be a universal kingdom encompassing every people group on the planet, that when we sit at the wedding feast of the Lamb one day, there will be people from all 12,000 of those sitting around the table with us. I sometimes try to imagine what the food there is going to be like. Like, I'm hoping for steak and potatoes, right? Some of y'all might be on that. My friend Daniel, he likes this stuff called pounded yam. It is the most tasty. He loves it. I'm sure he's not going to have to eat steak, and I hope I'm not going to have to eat pounded yam. I think Jesus is going to serve all of his people their favorite foods, and there are going to be a lot of different kinds of things to look at. It was as a result of understanding the promises of that verse that God led me in 2017 to start the Finishing Fund. Given my background in startups and private equity, the best way to describe the Finishing Fund is as a venture capital fund for the Great Commission. We receive commitments of capital from donors, people who give money to us, and then my partner and I find Great Commission projects to put that money to work in. Typically, those projects involve sending 2 near-culture missionaries, that means national believers, 2 near-culture missionaries for 3 years to a people group where nobody's ever been before with the gospel. So we're literally fulfilling Jesus' command to take the good news to every nation. When my friend Paul started following this in 2005, there were about 3,500 of these nations that nobody had ever been to tell them about Jesus. 2005, 3,500. When we started the Finishing Fund in 2017, there were still about 2,000 left that nobody had ever been to. In the last 6 years, we've helped send the gospel to 730 of these people groups. And to the best of our knowledge now, the list is down to just 20 groups with no active engagement project. Now, there's another 100 or so where there's a project underway, but there's no fruit yet, and there's probably another 100 or so that where there's been a project, but it hasn't succeeded. We're going to have to do it over. So we may have a couple of hundred to do, not just 20. But I want you to understand how, Jim said this, how close we are to seeing that first finish line of the Great Commission completed. By God's grace, we hope that we will see a project for all of those 20 in the next 6 or 8 weeks. And we'll then be going back and working on the ones that need to be spruced up. Pretty amazing thing. Often I get up and walk into find my wife somewhere in the house. She starts saying, "Now, you're going to say it again, aren't you?" And I say, "Yeah." And I say to her, "I can't believe I get to do what I get to do. I get to work with generous givers." I have a friend who says he's never met an unhappy, generous person, and I would agree with that. And they are my partners in this effort. Some of you are here in the room. I get to work with unbelievable ministry leaders who have courage and faith and, just the willingness to do the hardest things and go to the hardest places and are just fully in committed to this mission. I get to see God doing amazing things around the world, miraculous things. Things like if they'd happened in the first century, Luke would have included them in the book of Acts. We had a missionary team in a country in West Africa. Since this is being recorded, I'm not going to say the name of it, but it's a country where Sharia law is the law of the country. They were arrested for sharing the gospel. That's what they do, and they were bold about saying it. They weren't going to hide the fact that that's what they'd been doing. They were citizens of that country, so they faced death for evangelizing Christ. They were held for about a week. Many of us were praying. Finally, they went before the judge, and the judge said, "I'm releasing you. You're free to continue to practice Christianity. Just do it in private." Wink, right? We'd been praying for God to respond in a powerful way to this risk. I mean, they were on trial for their lives. They very easily could have been put to death for what they were doing. And the judge not only didn't sentence them, but he freed them and gave them permission to go. And they've been doing it in the months since, and nobody has touched them. God is urgent to see this task completed. So I get to work with great donors. I get to work with great ministry partners. I get to see God doing amazing things. And every day I get to use the skills that God gave me during that 40-year business career in the running of the Finishing Fund. I used to say, I had a 40-year career in business, and now I get to do the Finishing Fund. I now say it this way. through a 40-year training program, God prepared Doug for the best job he's ever had. And that's the way I think about it. It amazes me, it touches my heart to see how God was working upstream to prepare me for something that I never thought that I would ever do. I want to share, fourth book. I wrote this book a couple of years ago, and then the end will come, about this task and what God is doing. And I have one copy here. If anybody would like it, you're free to have it. I don't have to carry it home on the airplane. And if you'd like another one, just you can get it on Amazon. So if you want to read more about this, that's a great place to do that. I want to share this verse with you. This is maybe my second favorite verse in the Bible. This is in the book of Ephesians, chapter 2. We all know Ephesians 8 and 9. We're saved by grace through faith. This is not a result of works so that no one can boast, right? I mean, what Paul is saying in 8 and 9 is that our salvation has nothing to do with our works. We're saved by grace through faith. But in the very next verse, Ephesians 2:10, this is what he says. For we are God's workmanship, created in Christ Jesus to do good works which God has prepared in advance for us to do. So I love the fact that, as a writer, I love the fact that Paul juxtaposes these two apparently contrary ideas in the space of 3 sentences. Before you're saved, works mean nothing. After you're saved, what you do means everything. You're created to do good things. And then look at what it says there. That God has prepared in advance for who to do? For you to do. I love this idea that God has before I was even born, God had a plan of good things that he had reserved just for Doug to be a part of. And I am so thankful that I've discovered some of those things in my life. Sadly, I've said no many, many times, and I'm sure there were adventures on the yes side of those no's that would have been, amazing as well. But I am really thankful for this task that he's given me and the meaning that it has put into my life. I want to encourage you, wherever you are in your stage of life, old, young, I'm 66 now, God still has good works prepared just for you to do. And I encourage you to think about saying yes when opportunities come, because you never know if that might be the door that my yes to going to Nigeria in 1994 opened in my life. Thank you for listening to the story. I guess we're going to have time for a little Q&A. Is that right? Yeah, sure. There you go.
You have not because you ask not.
Yeah, y'all are move slow.
Storming the throne. Okay, Doug, that's amazing, and we're going to wrap that up in a few minutes. But he used the word inflection point today, and I suspect that I would love to be able to have a conversation around every table about an inflection point that you might have hit. Maybe it was when he mentioned really only 3 choices in regard to Jesus. Yeah. He's either crazy or a liar, or he's really the Lord. Maybe you've never heard of this thing called a Great Commission before, that there's something going on in this world, and there's this timeline in and toward eternal history. You may have never heard the word ethnos before, that there's these groups of people in the world that are micro expressions inside of what we know as nations, et cetera, et cetera. So I love this. I love that we're feasting on something. But you might have some questions that you have for Doug. Yeah, yes. Come on right back there, first hand.
Please.
Enjoyed that very, very much.
Thank you.
I noticed that Samaritan First, Franklin Graham's is one of your groups. Have you heard anything from him about what's going on in Gaza and Israel before?
I have not much. Sadly, my day job keeps me from being as attentive as I probably should be to some of those other ministry commitments. I do listen to a couple of people, and what I hear is that Israel is prosecuting that war and doing it. Who knows what the prophetic implications of that are, but it's certainly a big deal going on in the world right now.
Yeah, good. Yeah, right here.
Yes, sir.
Thank you for sharing your story. You were telling that there are 12,000, 13,000 groups. Where did you find that information, and is there a list that we can also...
If you didn't hear it, Arun said that you said something about 30,000 people groups, and where did you get that information?
There are several sources. There's 2 primary sources of people group data. One is a website you can visit called joshuaproject.org. Really good guys. The one we work from is a list called peoplegroups.org. It's the International Mission Board's research site. We use a list that is based on the IMB list and translated by an organization called Finishing the Task. We have a few differences of opinion about things like, let me give you an example. So IMB will list a people group multiple times in their diaspora population. So the Chinese, the Han Chinese would be on the IMB list like 80 times, right? The Chinese in the Philippines, the Chinese in the United States, we think, let's have a group one time in their primary area of population. So there's a few differences of opinion. But peoplegroups.org and Joshua Project would be the two places to look.
Excellent. Yeah, right there.
I was wondering, this is a little bit off the wall, but God's ways are not our ways are not God's ways. And I was curious if you ever saw a project and thought, boy, that's stupid. And
oh, yeah.
you invested in it anyways, and it happened. I was wondering if you have an example.
Did you ever see a project that looked stupid and you invested in it and it worked because God's ways are not like our ways?
Yeah, that's a great question. In my former life as in startup investing, I believe this to be true. The biggest mistake you can make in that world is to not say yes to the right deal. It's a way bigger mistake than saying, than doing something bad. Saying yes to a bad deal, you lose your capital. You put $1 in, you lose $1. You say no to a good deal, you lose $100, right? You lose the multiple that you would have gotten. And so, I've always had, personally, it suited me to that, and I think this work now, I have a sort of a bias toward action. So, it would take a pretty high bar of stupid for me to say that's I've just seen so many amazing things God doing. Let me tell you a story about that. You have time to do that real quick? So maybe the hardest people group on the planet, you can actually, if you think about it, write this down and pray about it, is a people group called the Sentinelese people that live on North Sentinel Island in the Indian Ocean, or the Bay of Bengal. They are hostile. If you remember a few years ago, a young man named John Chow was killed trying to go there with the gospel. Yeah, it makes it hard to send missionaries to a place where they kill you before you even get on the beach. And we've been wrestling for a long time. How are we going to make that happen? I just got a report. I'm still not sure it's true, but I'm running it to ground, that it's possible that a couple of Sentinelese have come off of the island onto the next island, which is very accessible. And they've come because conditions on their island have become bad. Why do people leave and go anywhere, right? Better, more food, better job, right? And they've come into civilization. And if that has happened, that will be one of the most amazing God things that I've ever seen. Here we are banging our heads against the wall, trying to figure out how we're going to get to their island. God says, watch this. I'll just bring them to you. And it won't surprise me if we find out that that's true. In fact, I would almost guarantee it that we will find out that those people have had dreams and visions and are already prepared to receive, to hear about Jesus when that happens. God not only sent them, but he prepared them to be the people of peace for their people group. So thank you for your question. It makes me think about all kinds of fun things that have happened, but yeah, there are some dumb ideas. There are some dumb ideas out there. So.
Hey, Bert, you're next.
Thank you.
For saying yes.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad I did at least once.
Amen. Two questions, really. I wonder if you could talk a bit about how you collaborate with other ministries.
Mm-hmm.
And the second is, how do you make capital allocation decisions? How do you decide which projects to support, where to go?
You want to repeat it?
Yeah, so how do they make allocation decisions, how they decide which group gets what when they're considering the support?
Yeah, we have it's helped. It's always been my opinion in business that, one of the most important things you can have is a really good fence around what your mission is, right? It protects you from running off after all kinds of things that, aren't your thing. And there's a million good things to do in God's kingdom, but we're really just trying to do one thing, trying to get the gospel to people groups who haven't heard it. So first step is the proposal to send people to a people group that nobody's been to before. If it's not that, we're probably not, interested in it. And then we start to evaluate the ministry. You know, have they done this kind of thing in the past before? How familiar are they with that area of the world? You know, have they worked there? Who will they send? What training methodologies do they use? You know, how do their finances look? How do their historical project, you know, reports look? And so we do diligence on those things. I will say that, you know, I think the Bible has, you know, the world's most important due diligence principle in it, which is faithful in little, faithful in much. The best way to figure out if somebody's going to be a good partner is to make them a small partner and then watch what they do. And if they do that well, then you do more. We started with a ministry called New Covenant Missions, 2018, and one little project for a couple of people groups. And I think now we've done 19 projects with them and, you know, more than 50 people groups. So they proved so faithful, it was just easy to say yes the second and third and fourth times, right? There was a first part to your question too, though. Collaboration. Oh, collaboration. Yeah, I mean, we're big on that. In fact, yesterday I was in Orlando for the meeting of some ministries, church planting ministries that have come together around this acronym, ACHIEVE, the ACHIEVE Alliance. A church in every village, everywhere. ACHIEVE. And these ministries are all, you know, doing that kind of work, but they're coming together to share information and with the intention of doing a shared fundraiser next year to share with you know, the body of Christ this idea, this vision of a church in every village, everywhere, and see if it might be possible to raise up, you know, significant new resources to help accomplish that. So we are big believers in that kind of collaboration. The last thing, not the very last thing, almost the last thing Jesus prayed for us is that we would be one as he and the Father are one. And so I think anytime you move toward unity and collaboration, God just rushes to want to bless that, right? Because it's an answer to his son's prayer. Thank you for the questions.
All right, we can make it one more. So you can, yeah, right here, Dave.
It seems to me that the most difficult challenge is the language, you know, to an isolated people group. And if you don't have someone who's, how do you bridge that first node of communication?
Yeah.
And then have effective translation to be able to get comprehension?
So y'all may have heard this joke, right? What do you call somebody who speaks 3 languages? Trilingual. 2 languages? Bilingual. What do you call somebody who speaks 1 language? American, right? And, you know, because of that, you know, our view of the world is that, you know, most people out there are like us. They speak, you know, 1 language, maybe a second one with a little bit of ability. But the fact of the matter is that in most places in the world, people are multilingual. They have to be because they live in these, you know, hodgepodges of people groups. And it's especially true for the minority people groups. Because think about it, if they go to the city to go to the doctor or if they interact with the government, they're not doing that in their small tribal language. They're doing that in a shared language. So in India, that might be Hindi or Bhojpuri or Marathi. There's several of them. Even the small shared languages have, you know, 30 million speakers over there. In North Africa, that might be Arabic. In, you know, Central Africa, it might be Hausa, Chinese. And we have found that it's very effective to begin work using shared language. Now, that's not ultimately optimal. Ultimately, what you want to do is we want the Bible in every language on the planet. We want everybody to have access to Jesus in the language they learned on their mother's knee. That's ideal. But if we had to wait for that to happen, we would be waiting for a long, long time. And so we follow a principle that I've used a lot in my life: try not to make the best the enemy of the good. And we pursue the shared language strategy, and it's proven really almost everywhere in the world to be very effective as a starting place. Does that answer your question? Yeah. Thank you.
Great. Well, we better wrap it up there. But how about one more thank you
you guys.
to Doug Cobb.
Great to be with you.
Thank you.